welcome back. It's a old May song, man. We have a special guest in the building, and I appreciate you flying all the way out from Cincinnati to come and join this little old podcast in
Well, thanks for having me.
the south east corner of Houston, Texas.
Well, thanks for having me out.
No, I appreciate
I'm excited.
it. So just for my listeners out there, your name is Callie Wright, and you have a blog/podcast called one of the most brilliant names I've heard, called the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Yep, the Gaytheist Manifesto.
And the Queer Side.
And the Queer Side. That's his storytelling podcast.
Storytelling podcast. And she has joined our podcast, and it was by popular demand on Twitter because I wanted to get I'm super interested in the topic of, and we'll get into it later, but I just wanted to give a preface of the conversation. I wanted to get a transgender representative on the podcast because I am ill-informed. I'm ignorant about the topic. I think as is most of America. And so the way I'm coming at it is, and I would love to preface this conversation with, anything that I say or anything that I any question I frame, it's meant as no disrespect, and
right.
it's pure curiosity. Like, because I understand this is a hot button issue in America today.
Oh yeah.
And so like I appreciate you being on the podcast, and let me introduce this. So this is my co-host. We call him No Swag.
What up?
No Swag.
Yeah, we call him No Swag because it's a long story, but he has no swag, and that's the most swag you can have.
Major keys.
Major keys. So, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this.
No,
this
it's amazing. I appreciate you coming through, man. So you are an atheist.
I am indeed. I'm a transgender atheist.
Transgender atheist.
And I'm queer too. And like I could probably come up with a couple of other things that make a lot of people like not like me as a person.
right. We wanted to fight that uphill battle.
I did a conservative talk radio show in Cincinnati.
Did you really?
Yeah, and the host was like, "So you're a transgender atheist? You gonna throw any more labels on there that you should make people hate you?" And like, yeah, because that's what it's about, right?
Yes,
like I want people to hate me. It's fine.
That's hilarious, man. So I want to talk about your atheism first.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I'm sure you get it as well. Like I get this devil worshiping connotation that comes with atheism. And so what led you to be an atheist?
To be honest, like my atheist coming out story is like really boring.
I would love to hear it.
I mean, I grew up Christian like most people in the U.S. do, primarily because of my grandma. My grandma was like a hardcore like fundamentalist, like Pentecostal, and I went to church with her because it was a thing to do as a kid, like spend time with grandma. And once I actually started reading the Bible, it didn't make sense to me, and started asking a lot of questions and got really bad answers, and was like, I guess this isn't a real thing. And thankfully I wasn't super indoctrinated, so it wasn't really part of my identity. Like it wasn't a huge struggle for me, like it is for some people, like oh my God, I've based my entire life around this, and then I figure out it doesn't make sense, and now there's this huge void in my life. Like thankfully I didn't have that. I didn't have that. So yeah, I mean it was literally just as like, none of this makes any sense, so I guess I don't believe it anymore. And I was kind of apathetic for a while. It was just like, okay, I figured out the answer to that question. Let's just move on to life stuff. And then when I was 16, 17, 18, I started to get more into activism, and see things that are like, religion is the reason that this bad thing is happening, at least partially. And so that's when it started to become more of atheist activism instead of like, well, that's just who I am. That's just what I believe about the world. It turned into activism. Like, this is an important conversation to have for all the reasons.
What is atheist activism to you? Like, so like what do you actively?
And there's a conversation around like, what's the right label to use? Because when I say I'm an atheist activist, honestly, I use the word atheist because that's a word that people know. My activism is really more humanist and secular, because for me, I'm not the kind of person who's going around trying to convince people not to believe in God anymore. My whole thing is like, I really don't care what you believe. I care how you treat people. And so if your religion tells you that you have to treat me badly because I'm gay or because I'm trans, or that you have to treat people badly because they're black or because they're Hispanic or because they're disabled, et cetera, then you're wrong.
Right.
But if you're a religious person and like you're interested in helping people, you're interested in making the world a better place, like I'll never shy away from the conversation around religion, but somebody who shares my values in that way, like making the world suck less and lifting people up, then like that's somebody that I share values with, and I'm not out there like, oh, I'm glad you agree on all of this important stuff and you're doing all this stuff to help people. But by the way, did you know God isn't real? Like that's not me.
That serious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough living in that world of atheism when you're not surrounded by people who feel like you. And that, I think that's it was important for me to, I guess, come out to the, I don't know if that's a correct term, but to come out as an atheist because
I mean, there's a lot of similarities. Especially if you're brought up that way.
Yeah.
Because there is that. I mean, for a lot of people, and that's a thing that I didn't really recognize until I started getting into atheist activism. Is like I would hear people, because obviously my coming out story is not traumatic,
Right.
But I hear a lot of people saying like no, I wish God was real because I don't want there to be nothing when I die.
Right.
And I really miss my grandma. I'd love to see her again. And I sympathize with that. And then there's the whole social stigma that goes along with it. I mean, I know people who don't talk to their families anymore, don't talk to their friends anymore, have lost jobs, So there are parallels between coming out as an atheist and coming out as gay or trans or a lot of things that are sort of the kind of person who's not considered the default in society.
Yeah, so I mean, mine was, my family always kind of knew I was an oddball. Like I grew up Muslim, right? Mm-hmm. So I grew up Muslim, and I was never really a practicing Muslim, but like I did what the family did. I kind of went through the motions. I think really just like a regular American. Like I don't think the majority of Americans are actually religious people. I think we're just, like you said, indoctrinated into believing like this is what it is. Right.
I go to church on Sunday because that's what a good person does.
Exactly. And you kind of get and atheism to me back then was the devil worshiping. Like that's how I viewed it. But the more and more I thought about religion and delved into the crux of why we believe what we believe, it totally changed for me. And my coming out was more. It wasn't a surprise to my family. And so you saying it. What about your family? Was it a surprise to your family?
It was to my grandma. I don't think it was to my mom or anyone else. But my grandma is really the only person in my family who's super religious. My grandma or my mom
Christian.
is she's Pentecostal, and my mom is one of the more like she's culturally Christian. So like if you ask her if she believes in God, she'll say yes. But like when was the last time you read the Bible or went to church or like do you actually believe this kind of stuff? Like I think it's just because that's what she was brought up with, and that's fine. But my grandma was very much like, oh, that's not good, and lots and lots of conversations. Although what's funny about that is me becoming an atheist didn't really even change our relationship that much.
That's
aside
awesome,
from the occasional argument, she would say something like, well, Jesus is coming soon, and I'm like, well, I don't really think that's a thing. Like, but coming out as trans was the thing. Like, I don't talk to my grandma anymore because of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like being an atheist was okay, but being trans was not. And I know a lot of people who that situation's reversed. Like
right.
I have a close friend who's gay. His family could not care less.
Right.
But if they found out he was an atheist, they'd probably disown him.
That's just crazy.
Yeah, it's really weird how that works out. Yeah.
That is wild. I don't know. That is so wild to me, man. Family values, man. It's amazing. So I want to hop right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I am ignorant about this and I have no idea. So like, please forgive me if I say anything disrespectful and correct me if I'm wrong.
You're proactively forgiven.
Okay, I appreciate it. So you are a transgender, and that means you were born a man and transitioned into a woman.
I would I would be more nuanced with the wording.
Yeah. Let me know, because I'm.
So the word transgender is an umbrella term that describes someone who doesn't identify with what they were assigned at birth, right?
Okay.
So I was born with a penis. They marked an M on my birth certificate, and I don't identify as male.
Okay.
And there are all kinds of spaces along that spectrum that people exist on. Right. So obviously trans men exist, people who are assigned female at birth but identify as men. Okay. And then there are non-binary people who identify somewhere in between or nowhere on on that binary.
Right.
And so my particular situation is I use the phrase assigned male at birth, because that's never really what I was. That's just what people said I was based on how I looked.
Right.
And I've never really felt comfortable with that label.
So gender to you is more of a social construct than it is an actual...
I've spent years trying to answer that question satisfactorily.
Okay.
So I'll just tell you what tells me how I identify is a combination of two things.
Okay.
So a lot of the social constructs around gender, I identify way more with the feminine side of things than with the masculine side of things.
Can you give an example?
So my the way that I relate to people emotionally,
Okay.
the way that I react to situations, I'm an extraordinarily sensitive person.
Okay.
But of course, men can be sensitive, right? Men can have close, emotionally nurturing relationships and still be comfortable identifying as men. So like obviously that can't be the entire determining factor.
Right.
And then the second part of that for me was just not feeling comfortable in my body. And you know, when puberty happens, like obviously puberty is just fucking weird for everyone, right? Like, because puberty is just weird. But, you know, I noticed when that happened that it wasn't weird for me in the same way that it was weird for my friends. And
how so?
It just, you know, when my body was changing, it didn't feel weird so much as it felt wrong.
Really?
And I would look at the way that girls' bodies were changing, and that was the thing that made sense to me. And
wow.
yeah, and it was literally, I mean, I had a light bulb moment. I was sitting at the lunch table. I was in 5th grade, and my one friend, because I was a nerdy kid, I didn't have a ton of friends, but my one friend that I ate lunch with all the time wasn't there that day. So I was just kind of hanging out by myself, and like this stuff was just boiling in my head, and it literally, it just like light bulb moment. Like, I was supposed to be a girl. That's what this is. That's what this means.
Wow. And this is 5th grade you felt this. So
I was like 10.
10 years old.
Yeah. And puberty was what did it. And then, you know, to varying degrees, I was able to, because obviously then, you know, I mean, this was 20 years ago.
Right.
You know, I had no vocabulary for that. I didn't know that other people like me existed.
Right.
So I assumed that meant there was something terribly wrong with me, you know, because there was a kid in my class that admitted to liking purple, you know, and he was teased mercilessly because purple's a girl color, right? Right. There's nothing wrong with purple.
Thought it was royalty. Purple's royalty.
But so that, you know, in my mind, that let me know that like if anybody knows about this, then like my life is over with. You know what I mean? So like, I was just like, there's something terribly wrong with me. I can't tell anyone about this. I can't act on it. I can't ever do anything about this because that's just wrong. And, you know, to varying degrees throughout my, you know, my teens and 20s, sometimes I was able to push it on the back burner and not really worry about it. And then there were times where it was just like the most all-consuming thought in my head. And then when I was 28, so this was 4 years ago, it got to the point where I was having thoughts of self-harm and, you know, just thinking to myself, like, you know, it wouldn't be the worst thing if I didn't wake up tomorrow. And, you know, thankfully I wasn't so far gone. Like, I realized that those were really unhealthy things to be thinking. And I knew why I was feeling that way, but denial is super powerful, you know? Yeah. So it took me a minute to even get to the point where like, gosh, can I even talk to anybody about this? 'Cause, you know, when you have a secret like that, it's one of those things like knowing the little bit that I knew then, I didn't want it to be true because I assumed that my life would be destroyed if I came out. You know, I'd lose my job, I'd lose my family, I'd lose my friends, you know, everything that was important to me in life, I would basically have to start over, and that's scary.
Definitely.
And so, you know, in my mind, if it stays in my head and I don't ever put it out to the world, I can pretend it's not real.
Oof.
And, you know, it finally got to the point where it's like, this is probably going to kill me if I continue along that path.
Wow.
And so like, I literally like hands shaking, you know, feel like I'm about to pass out. I literally just typed the word transgender into a search engine once. And, you know, and then, you know, I found Facebook groups and message boards and websites. And I'm like, there are a lot of people who are like this, and it's there's not something wrong with me because of this, and so that sort of opened the floodgates, and I was able to, you know, start talking to my friends and family about it, and thankfully in my situation, all of my, you know, my fears about being rejected by my friends and family and stuff, those all turned out to be unfounded. You know, there was some tough moments with my mom, but her ultimate thing was like, I want you to be happy and I love you, so like, if that's what this is, then do it,
That's
and
important.
I'll figure it out.
That's super important.
And my mom and I are now closer than we ever have been,
Wow.
which is awesome.
Right.
And so
you found sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
So you found refuge in the internet.
Oh, totally.
And so like the internet kind of saved your mental state.
Yeah, well, it's what started it. The really big turning point for me was going to a support group meeting for the first time.
Okay. And this was in
Cincinnati. Yeah. And so, eventually I typed Cincinnati transgender, and I found, I found a support group to go to. And, and again, that's one of those things that's like, wow, if I do this, I'm putting this out into the real world now. So I can't pretend like it's not real anymore. So that's like a big step to take.
Right.
And so I pulled into the parking lot, and I had a friend who I'd been talking to about this, and she knew that I was going. And she called me, and she's like, you still going? I was like, yeah, I'm sitting in the parking lot now. She's like, why are you sitting in the parking lot? I was like, I'm fucking terrified.
Yeah.
Is why I'm sitting in the parking lot. And I'm just like, my hands are on the steering wheel. I'm just like shaking. And she's like, Callie, with all the love that I can muster, hang up the fucking phone and fucking go inside.
Right.
And, in my head, I still have all of these really toxic stereotypes about trans people,
Right.
So I'm like, am I going to go, that's like going to be a bunch of weirdos, like people I don't want to be associated with, like all of that kind of stuff. And it's silly to think that way, but in a lot of places, that's what we're taught about trans people. Like the only time you hear or see anything in the media is when it's something that somebody can sensationalize, right? We're almost never painted as, oh, these are just regular people trying to live their lives.
So it's crazy that you bring that up, and I don't remember the name, but it was an important moment for, I think, our society. And what it was let's see, the original. So there was a woman named Aletha Garrison.
Mm-hmm.
She in 1992 she served one term, and she ran for Boston City Council.
Yeah.
And
familiar.
she was the first transgender woman, and there was just one elected.
Danica Kareem.
Danica Kareem. So if you type that in, I think that is huge for. We are a secular society. I believe we are.
Right.
Striving to be. But I think that's huge for progression in this country.
Yeah. Well,
I spell her name?
Danica. There it is.
Danica.
Yeah, she's the first one right there. Yeah.
There it is. Okay.
I think it's Reem. I don't know if it's Reem or Rome, but yeah.
Rome.
And she's also a heavy metal singer and used to be a journalist. So yeah, she's pretty awesome.
So she won.
She's a Virginia State lawmaker.
Virginia State. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That I think that says a lot about. The climate today, and the political climate today. That so many left-leaning people are going out to vote. I think it's important.
Yeah. Well, and it's important because, it's harder to hate somebody if you know them, right?
True.
Obviously, it's possible because there are lots of people who know me really well and hate me. It's fine. Right. But it's just when you see somebody whose experience is seemingly so radically different from your own, it's easy to put them in a group off to the side.
Yeah.
We
fear what we don't understand.
Yeah, and that's where I was.
Right.
But I make it into the support group meeting, and of course I just find a bunch of people who are just living life, and I sat down, and they kind of go around the room, and everybody's just talking about well, here's what I'm struggling with right now, or here's my story, and this was my first time ever talking with someone in person about it who shared that experience, and this lady who eventually became kind of like my aunt, and then turned out to be a terrible person. That's a different story. But
we all have those,
right? But she looked at me and she was just like, "Listen, it's okay for you to be who you are, and it's okay for you to have these feelings, and it's okay if however your story and however your journey turns out, that's okay." We're here to hold your hand and help you. We're not here to tell you who you should and shouldn't be, and we're just here to bounce those questions off of and ask those questions off of. And that was a really, really big turning point for me, because it's these are actual real life people who are living their lives, because that was the thing that kept me in the closet for so long. At least one of the things is my life even going to be worth living after this? You know what I mean? Am I going to be so ostracized? Am I going to, I'm going to lose my job? All of that kind of stuff. And And that was the first time it was like, wow, this is actually possible. Right. I might actually be able to do this.
So it was the first time you felt like happiness and comfortable in your own skin.
Well, I wouldn't go that far because I still had a lot of discomfort, but that was the first time that I felt hope around it.
Okay.
And saying like, this is a thing that I can do, because previous to this, I'd had the same friend who called me and was like, get off the fucking phone and go inside. Right. She lives a couple hours away from me, and like she came down and she had clothes and makeup and all that kind of stuff, and she's like, we're gonna go out to dinner or something like that, so that was awesome. But I was still very much in the mode of like, well, I don't know if this is a thing that I can actually do like in life, but
Right.
it's a thing that I can like try and feel good about. That was really the first time that I felt like super comfortable in my skin. And that was a huge moment too, because it's not all about clothes and appearance, but that's part of it for some people.
100% it is, yeah.
Some people are less concerned with it. I kind of am. But I literally I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, oh, okay, that's an image that makes sense to me.
So you always saw yourself as a woman, and you never felt like a man.
Yeah. To varying degrees, because a lot of some of
Right.
it's subconscious.
Right. Okay. So like, as far as like, and like again, go back to the preface. It's just purely curiosity.
You're good.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have a tough time having these conversations because they're not faced with the situations, right? So it's a rare occurrence to find somebody that is a transgender.
Transgender person. Transgender is a verb, not an adjective, not a noun.
Okay, so that's good to know because
Yeah.
and I don't want to. I do want to talk about that too. And not to just jump around, but like
Oh, we could do 3 hours on language alone.
I'm saying because pronouns are super
Right.
important, right? And so like I follow a lot of independent media sources because I think it's healthy to get a dose of the other side.
Oh yeah.
And I would consider myself left middle. I'm not super left, but I'm like left middle.
Yeah.
And a lot of the right rhetoric when it comes to the transgender issue, I don't know, is that proper? I don't.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a
Transgender community, transgender issues.
community,
Yeah.
is the biological aspect of it and how they refuse to acknowledge people as the pronoun that they want to be perceived as, right? And so my whole thing is, if whatever you want to call yourself, I'm okay with that. Like, it doesn't bother me one bit. It doesn't bother me at all. But people feel kind of like a problem with their freedom of speech. It gets into that issue with them when they say, I shouldn't have to address you how you want me to address you. Like, if I see you as a woman, you're a woman to me. If I see you as a man, you're a man to me. And so that disrespect aspect of it, how much is that influential to your activism as far as pronouns is concerned?
Well, it's huge because, my response to that always when I get into those arguments with people is like, okay, so let's do a thought experiment.
Okay.
Let's say you get into a terrible accident and you lose your penis for one reason or another. Are you going to change your pronouns? Are you going to change your name?
Probably not.
So your identity isn't tied up with your biology either. You just are who you are.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So and I use that argument when people come at me with that. And I'm just like
I never
I
thought
can,
about it like that.
Yeah, like I can prove to you that your identity isn't based on your biology or your anatomy either.
So what do you think? So what do you think conceptually gender is in our society, in the context of our society? What do you think gender is?
In the context of the way society sees it,
Our society.
I think. I mean, I think it's a social construct built by Christian men to keep women largely subservient.
Okay.
Is what it really comes down to. It's generally speaking, women aren't as physically strong or as physically big as men, that kind of stuff. So it's a power structure thing. Okay. We want to stay in charge, so we define these roles. We define who goes into these roles, and we're the ones in control.
So do you think gender roles are? I mean, I feel like they're changing in our society.
Oh yeah, big time.
So do you? It's hard. So like, I had a huge conversation with my buddy the other day about the oppression of women in general. Do you feel that same struggle with the oppression of women in your shoes.
A lot of it, yeah. And it's actually a really interesting thing because, you know, I'm pretty leftist, right? I didn't used to be. And I used to be one of those people that was like, you know, as soon as people started talking about like systemic oppression, you know, privilege, any of that kind of stuff, like my brain automatically turns off. Like privilege isn't a thing. Come on.
Right.
But when I came out and people stopped seeing me as a man and started seeing me as a woman, I realized the privilege that I had lost. So it took me losing it to recognize that it existed in the first place. So,
so talk about that.
Yeah. So I have an audio engineering background. I ran a recording studio for a while. And the first really big instance of it was I was in a Facebook group for audio engineers, and it's largely people who record music and that kind of stuff. And there was a thread. It was super innocuous. It was like, what are some tips to get good guitar tone? And like, I was like, oh, I've got a thing that I normally do that like I get pretty good results with. And I had participated in that group before and was treated as nothing more than just like another person, you know, contributing information and having discussion, right? The first time I commented in that group as a woman, everything that I said was the dumbest thing in the world.
Really?
And it was like, well, that doesn't work, and here's why. You know, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, you understand, like, I make money doing this and people come to me. So it's like, if it's subjectively, if it's not your thing, that's fine. Obviously, that's all subjective. But like, to just completely dismiss, like, there's something else going on there. You know, and it happens anytime.
Immediate effects of that.
Oh, 100%. And like, you know, you jump into anything that's stereotypically male-dominated, sports, technology, that kind of stuff. Like, I'm not huge into sports, but like technology is an interest of mine. And you know, you jump into those conversations, and you have to spend time proving that you know what you're talking about before you're allowed to enter the conversation, as opposed to just being allowed to enter the conversation.
Gotta fight for your right to party.
Yeah, that's what it is.
So that's interesting. So okay, I want to get your take on this. Type in the Cam Newton comment with the lady reporter, right? Because I feel a certain way about this, and I don't feel the way I think I should feel the way about this, being a left-leaning human being. So Cam Newton is a
read about it, or
no, we can watch it. So Cam Newton is he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and this lady reporter asks him a question, and his response got a lot of bad feedback, and so here it is. Excuse the Wi-Fi being slow. Press that sideways triangle right there. Of course, they got to pay the bills.
Right. Yeah.
30 seconds.
That's a long commercial.
Yeah,
man.
they pay some money for that. For these horses.
I think this is the longest internet commercial I've ever seen.
Man.
They made us watch that. That's amazing.
Oh, wait.
I don't even know what it is.
I don't know.
I just know I want to go rent an RV now.
Right.
Forgot what we was watching.
I didn't see any receivers playing with Devin Funchess, who seemed to really embrace the physicality of his routes and getting those extra yards. Does that give you a little bit of an enjoyment to see him kind of truck sticking people out there?
It's funny to hear a female talk about routes, but fun is coming along, man. We're gonna. This is a big game for him. It's funny to hear.
All right, cut it off because I think they playing him now.
Routes.
Yeah.
So,
It's funny.
so he caught a lot of flack. He lost sponsorships because of that,
Yeah.
and they said he was sexist, yada yada yada. I didn't see a huge issue with it, and here's why. If you heard her question, it wasn't a necessarily. It wasn't a deep question. I don't think it was a well thought out question. I think she mentioned mentioned like a video game reference, like you really truck sticking guys out there. It wasn't a good question, right?
Right.
And what he said was, it's funny to hear females talk about routes. I would agree, and the reason why I agree is because you don't see a lot of women running routes. It's a male dominated sport,
Right.
and the rhetoric behind the outrage of it is women are subjugated in sports, and they always have to prove themselves and yada yada. But in that instance, I don't think she was very knowledgeable about the subject, and you're talking
Right.
to one of the best that is doing it, right? And so it's funny, but the problem with it is they painted him like he ignored her, and he's like, oh, a woman's asking me a question. No, he said it's funny to hear that, and he answered it very thoroughly. They cut him off and they kept replaying that loop because that's what clickbait is.
Right.
But he answered it very thoroughly, very thoughtfully. He answered a question.
Well, my thing is though, would he have felt the need to start his answer off if that question had been asked by a man?
Probably
because
not.
most sports reporters, I'm guessing, if they played sports at all, they played sports in high school, but they don't play sports now.
Right.
You know, so they may have played in high school, they may have played at the collegiate level. Obviously, playing at the NFL is not the same thing.
Right.
So almost anyone who asks him that question is probably coming from somewhat of a place of ignorance, right?
100%.
So if it's a dumb question, I mean, of course, call it out as a dumb question. I just don't understand why you would have to bring gender into it, as if being a woman automatically disqualifies you from knowing what you're talking about. Because I doubt if a guy would have asked that same question that he would have been as dismissive, if that makes sense.
It does, and I
So saying it's funny is dismissive.
and that was my problem with it. Like I don't think it was as dismissive as it was just his actual thoughts about it.
Right.
Like, and I think that's the culture that we're in today is everything isn't politically motivated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think Cam Newton was speaking as a man talking to the woman base, right? I think he was just him addressing a question that he thought was kind of silly. And he still answered it. But like, so the whole point with me playing that was, do you feel that subjugation being identifying as a woman now? Mm-hmm. And you feel that?
Totally. Yeah. Well, and there's also some that gets heaped on top of it because I'm trans. Of course, I think being trans is a thing. So people automatically dismiss what I have to say based on that too.
Okay.
So everything that I say is taken in the context of like, well, of course you're going to say that. I couldn't possibly have anything valuable to add because I'm in it, right? So of course I'm going to argue in favor of letting trans people like live in society as normal human beings. So there are a couple of ways in which a lot of times things that I say are dismissed, and one of them is just generally sexism, because I mean, I'm a nerd, right? And sexism is a huge thing in nerd culture, right? Like if I'm a Star Trek fan, I have to prove that I've seen every episode. I have to demonstrate the fact that I know all the episode names of Star Trek episodes, and I have to demonstrate that I have this encyclopedic knowledge before I'm allowed to enter the conversation. So even silly things like that, I see. And then, when you're talking about political conversations and that kind of stuff, it gets into like, well, yeah, you're just an emotional woman being hysterical. You're letting your emotions get into it. You're not being logical. You're not being rational. Like dismissive stuff like that all of the time.
It's it's hard to place because I think the reason why I get along with a lot of people because it's easy for me to place myself in their shoes.
Get along with a lot of people.
I do get along with a lot of people. God damn it. I'm very argumentative, but I get along with people.
Yeah.
But it's because for the most part I'm very sympathetic to people's situations. For the most part, I feel like there's an objective reality we all have to agree upon. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I try to put myself in other people's shoes, and I think this is why I feel like it's such a hot button issue in America. Is it's hard for people to put themselves in your shoes.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so foreign. It's extremely foreign. And there's so many questions that people have and they're afraid to ask them. And I think a big problem I had was they were talking, like there was this one, like pull up this, it was the Caitlyn Jenner bathroom in I think it was in Dallas.
Oh God.
You saw that?
Yeah.
So I wanted to get your opinion on this.
It's so awkward.
So
like
so people that haven't seen it, it's a just go to the images. So it's a bathroom in Texas, and the top left. Yep, top left. So it's a bathroom in Texas, and they put for the male they put Bruce Jenner when he was running in the Olympics, and then they put Caitlyn Jenner on the cover of Vanity Fair so like when I look at, and I was just being honest, when I look at that, I think it's fucking hilarious. And I think it's witty, right? But people are felt disrespected by it. And this one I don't understand. And if you could explain this to me, because to me, this is saying, here's a man that identifies as a woman now. Is that not the whole point of seeing people as who they identify as?
Well, to me, it plays into the fact that people don't actually think of her as who she actually is.
Right.
And I hate defending Caitlyn Jenner because I don't fucking like her.
I don't like her either.
But
I don't like her
there's
either.
there's a basic respect obviously that has to happen. And
Right.
and so we see this a lot of times. A lot of times when you're having conversations with people and the entire conversation ends up them trying to get you to concede that you're not really who you think you are, who you say you are.
Okay.
So they're constantly trying to get you to concede like oh, well, but you were born a man, right? It's like, well, no, in my head I've always been who I was. You know what I mean? I just didn't project it outwardly. Right. So what that does to me is it's just reinforcing the fact that we're not accepting her as who she actually is. We're putting emphasis on who she used to be and putting emphasis on the change. And there are some people who are okay with that, right? There are some people who will say, like, I used to be a man and now I'm a woman, right? There are some people who say that. I would say, in my experience, that's a minority of folks but I'm not one to police anyone's experience or how they identify, but generally speaking, that's not what you're going to find if you talk to people.
So do you feel a certain way about this right here, this specific instance?
I do.
And what do you feel about
it? To me, it's just really awkward. Like I would want to say like what was the thought behind this? Because in my mind, what it immediately goes to for me is that they think it's funny. Agreed. And in my mind, like, I'm just tired of being the butt of everybody's jokes.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because obviously humor is really important. And I'm not saying a trans joke can never be funny, right?
Okay, yeah.
But in my mind, it feels like it feels like they're using transness as a joke. And like, that's funny. She used to be a guy and now she's a girl. That's funny. And it's like, to me, there's nothing funny about that specific. I mean, you could write comedy for years about Caitlyn Jenner, right? But making a joke specifically out of her transness, I think is, I think it's a shot across the bow at all trans people. Who you are is a joke,
right?
And we're going to exploit that because we think it's funny,
right?
And a certain way, again, I get it, right? Because people don't know. People don't know. But I just think like, I was to a point in my life where I wanted to kill myself because of this. That's not funny. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I came out and was supported and I was able to get on hormones and able to get surgeries and all this stuff, and my life now is amazing. It's incredible. I lead an incredible life. I am extraordinarily privileged, and a lot of it was because I was allowed to make that transition, and it didn't come at a super high social cost for me. I mean, relationships with a couple of family members and I lost a job over it, but in the grand scheme of things, I didn't lose a ton, thankfully. Right. And so when I look back at that, I'm just like, that's not a thing. That's not funny. It's not something to make a joke about because it's serious stuff. I mean, people do die over this stuff. People are murdered. People commit suicide. So making a joke like that specifically out of trans is just really, really off-putting to me.
Right. And now I feel like a piece of shit.
but that's the point, right? You didn't know.
Yeah, and so that's a huge reason why I wanted you to come on this podcast, was because I'm just so ignorant about this, right? I have no idea. And when I saw this at first, I was like, "Come on, that's funny." I even tweeted about it. I was like, "Come on, that's funny." And I think coming from your perspective and hearing your perspective and hearing your passion about it, I understand why that would not be funny because. People on
get this over here.
Get it out of my sight.
But, people on the brink of suicide. People get murdered because of this, and for it to be is just not worth it in your eyes.
Yeah,
in people's eyes.
And the thing that I think is interesting about it is like all of the funny trans jokes that I've ever heard are jokes that people who aren't trans largely probably wouldn't get.
Right.
Like, I'm probably going to screw this up, but I'm going to try to tell it.
Let's do it.
So how many trans people does it take to screw in a light bulb?
I don't know, man.
It takes it. Okay, see. Okay, I'm just gonna explain the joke
Okay, cool.
because I don't remember the punchline, and I'm not a hugely funny person anyway. So the joke is one person to screw in the light bulb, and then a therapist to write a letter for the trans person to say that they shouldn't have to live in the dark, and because that's real, right?
That's deep, though.
To get my surgery, I had to get 3 letters from a doctor to send to the surgeon to get the insurance to approve it, and all that. So like there's such a high barrier that a lot of people have to go through, and so the butt of the joke there is the system that prevents so many people from accessing medical care. Right. It's not, wow, being trans is hilarious and your life is a joke. The target of the joke is the ridiculous hoops that we have to jump through to access medical care, right? But a lot of people don't realize that bar is there. Right. And so, if I told the joke, if I was actually a funny person and told the joke, like a lot of times it would go over somebody's head.
Right. Because they don't understand that,
right.
that
because,
side of it.
Because most of the jokes that we hear, and I see it everywhere too. Like I went back and watched Scrubs with my fiance, there are so many transphobic jokes in Scrubs. Like
really?
It's literally like, oh, he's dressing in women's clothes. He's a woman. That's funny. And I mean, that's literally the entire joke.
Right.
And it's like, God, that makes me feel really just uncomfortable,
right.
And you see it everywhere. And that's, my life is a joke in many corners of society.
It makes sense now to me.
Yeah.
Because I was very apprehensive of, and I want to frame this as nice as possible, man, because I was very apprehensive about people's feelings about transgenderism. Is that because, and this is part of what I wanted to get into as well, is the biology of it, mm-hmm. right? I was super set on the science of it, right? Mm-hmm. The science of it is you were born, you got XX and you got XY. You're either a man or you're a woman.
For most people, there's 5% of people who don't even have that.
Yeah, so. But talking with you, I actually saw my girlfriend right now is pregnant, and we went to a doctor, and I asked her opinion on the situation, and she's extremely helpful on it. And she said she gave me a bunch of medical terms of people who have XXXY and they have an extra chromosome.
Intersex. Yep.
Yeah, there's intersex people, and there's people, and I want to be extremely kind when I say this, but like Klinefelter syndrome, and it's people with an extra chromosome, but they're I don't want to say not asexual. What is the term? Because I'm
pretty sure it's an intersex condition, because intersex is a spectrum too. Like there's a large spectrum of intersex conditions.
Right. Okay, so the biology of human beings, I think it's not as clear cut as I thought it was when I first started looking into this. I thought it was male and female, and the rest is it's a social construct.
I'll tell you the anecdote that blew my mind. I had an intersex activist on my show to talk about intersex issues, and what they told me was that there are about as many intersex people in the world as there are redheads.
Really?
Yep.
Ginger.
Yep. So it's not this rare, tiny, insignificant slice of humanity that experiences these conditions. So
that's interesting to me, because I feel like we've bred a society of male versus female with social roles, and you play your roles. And it's kind of forced people like yourself in a corner. And I think, man, just talking to you makes so much more sense than before. I had all these preconceived. I'm gonna be honest. I was gonna be on here and I was gonna be combative, and I was gonna be like, I don't feel like. But like talking to you and listening to your experience is totally different for me, and it changes my worldview.
That's awesome.
No, it's and that's why it was important for me to have this conversation, because it was necessarily for my demographic, but it was for myself. Yeah. Because I don't know anybody that's and I don't want to fuck this up. A transgender person. A transgender person. I'm trash with grammar. I'm trash with English anyway. I'm terrible with that. But
and the thing that I always say is you think about it, like, what else about a person's biology do you obsess over and hold people to standards based on, right? There's really not anything. Why does it matter to some random person that I met on the street that I was born with a penis? Why does that matter?
Right. I think the big thing that they were talking about as far as like legislation and stuff is concerned was the bathroom issue, right? And so what bathroom do you go to?
Oh, women's, absolutely.
You go to the women's bathroom. And so a lot of men feel feel a certain way about that, and they say, I don't want my daughters going to, because, and I don't know the statistics as far as like assaults go in bathrooms. I don't know the statistics, but that is their worry, that any sick person can go and I'm not saying you're sick. I'm saying
No, yeah.
Okay,
the argument is if you say trans women can use the women's restrooms, then people are going to pretend and they're going to assault kids. And
I'm sure you could cite a statistic for that.
Well, so there's a couple of things with that issue. So first of all, most of the time when people are assaulted in bathrooms, it's grown men assaulting young boys.
Really?
Yeah. Like I went back and I looked.
Those are Catholic bathrooms.
Right. and I was looking at this and I was like, how many people are assaulted in women's restrooms? And it was so hard to find those stories.
Right.
But I was able to find 10 of grown men assaulting young boys.
Wow.
So it's like, so are we going to make a law about that? Because if that's what we're really concerned about, why wouldn't we say, okay, well, this is the thing that happens the majority of time, so why don't we limit grown men's access to bathrooms? Because those are the people who are actually assaulting people. And then a couple of other things on that is, I think the statistic is 80% of the time sexual assault is committed by somebody who knows the victim. So family member, coach, priest, or pastor. So like the thing of being assaulted in a bathroom by a stranger, it almost never happens, and that's not to diminish the experience of people who have experienced that, because it does happen. Of course. But if we're worried that there's going to be this just wave of this stuff happening, I mean, it's just not a thing. Right. It's fear mongering is what it is, because a lot
of the right's rhetoric is that.
Exactly, because in society still, I mean, I think there's a tipping point happening at the moment, but still, I mean, largely we're a question mark in society's eyes, right? Like people just don't know what even being trans means. And so it's really easy when you hear somebody on Fox News or you hear, a conservative radio commentator, the very first thing they hear about trans people is that we're coming into bathrooms after your kids. You know what I mean? They're a blank and they're filled with that information. Right. So instead of trying to fill a void, you're fighting against a negative already. Right. And it's really easy to do when somebody is an unknown, and the other thing to think about too is that, trans people are far more likely to be assaulted than commit them. If I'm in a bathroom with 10 other people, I guarantee you I'm probably the most nervous person in the bathroom, justifiably so. Right. And thankfully nothing bad has ever happened. I mean, I've gotten some dirty looks and some comments and that kind of stuff. But
so as far as like biologically, have you had a surgery or have you, and so you no longer have a penis?
Right.
And do you have a vagina now? Mm-hmm. And so how does that work? I'm totally...
So it's really interesting. And you're not queasy or anything like that.
Oh,
like,
grown man.
Warning for the listeners,
we get money, man. It's all good.
Literally, they turn your penis inside out.
They flip it in?
Yep. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's
there's I don't want to disrespect the surgeons,
right? Yeah, there's a really great animation on YouTube that shows exactly the process.
Type that up.
If you find an actual video of it, you're not going to see what's going on but like there's a really great animation of it.
Is there a name? Because we can pull it
I can't remember. I just type in like sex reassignment surgery animation. Yeah, and you can find it.
So is there a sensation there?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I had it 3 months ago.
Too crazy.
Here's the thing. I'll preface by saying I am way more open about this stuff than a lot of trans folks are.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't want to.
I have zero problems discussing any of this.
Perfect.
A lot of people may not. So it's not a thing to like randomly ask trans people about. Hey, tell me about your genitals. You know what I mean? But for me, so there's a couple of things with this. So. A lot of times when people ask about surgery, and I don't think this is where you're coming from, but a lot of times when people ask about the surgery, what they're after is the shock, right? Oh my God, you cut your penis off. Right. You know what I mean? They want to be shocked by hearing a description of this.
And like strictly
I don't, but a lot of times that's where it comes from. And so like when those people ask me those questions, I'm like, just fucking Google it, dude. Right. But the reason that I think it's important, and a lot of trans people are hesitant to talk about,
play it. Go ahead.
Are hesitant to talk about surgery for that reason, right? Because we don't want to become like objects of fascination because of our genitals. Right. You know what I mean? But there is an important thing to think of around what it actually does for the quality of people's lives.
Right.
The thing that I always the example that I give, the thought experiment that I use is like, how would you feel tomorrow if you woke up and you had a penis attached to your elbow?
I don't know how I'd feel about that, man. It'd be weird.
Right, exactly. And that's how it felt having one on my crotch.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so
And
as far and for people that are just listening right now, like I'm watching a video of the actual surgery, and they're flipping. It's hard to explain, but they're turning the penis inside out, and they're putting it back inside the body. So like growing up.
This is transmasculine surgery. This is how they surgically construct a penis for a transmasculine person.
And what does transmasculine mean?
Someone who was assigned female at birth and transitions towards male. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so they
look down like, why don't I have one?
Exactly.
And you look down like, what is this thing?
Yep.
And so, okay, as far as like, and if I'm getting too personal, please let me know. But it's just,
like I said, I would say too personal doesn't really exist for me.
Okay, cool.
But for anyone who's listening, random trans people on the street, these are not questions you ask people.
Okay. So, and that's important. That's important to say, because like some people aren't as open about.
That's the right one. That's
the one you had.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh my God.
I warned you.
Yeah. Okay, so how much did this cost?
They billed my insurance company $80,000.
$80,000.
And I ended up paying about $2,000 of that.
Okay, so this is new to me.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, I mean, it's fascinating just scientifically how it works, right?
No, I mean, I'm
like, but
I'm in love with science, and this is fucking mind blowing. I didn't know it was this. I didn't know this was possible. I ain't gonna lie. I have no idea.
Yeah, and it's been happening since the 50s.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first one was 1956.
Okay, so
I'm probably wrong about that exactly, but
when you're a child and you're starting to go through puberty and you start to feel sexual sensations, are you attracted to men?
I've always been attracted to pretty much anybody. Like, I don't really have.
So you're would you consider bisexual?
I just use the word queer.
And I mean, I don't know what queer means, because I think the LGBT, I think it's a Q and there's an I now. And
there's like the longest version of the acronym I've seen is like 13 letters.
There's 13 letters. Yeah. See, that's ridiculous.
It's like lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, asexual, pansexual, agender, aromantic.
Like, come on, like
queer questioning. Like,
that's
it's
a lot. Like,
the terminology is hard, right? Because
but it's like there's only 26 letters.
Right. Well, and that's the problem, right? Because this stuff is all on a spectrum. None of it's binary, right? You're not like one thing or another. A lot of people are in between, and that's the reason that I use queer is because I kind of use it as an umbrella term, right?
So what is
like,
queer? What is queer?
So
I always thought it was like a disrespectful, like it was like, and no disrespect, but like I thought it was like when somebody says faggot. I thought it was like that.
And it used to be, and that's it's kind of been reclaimed as a slur. Like, a lot of people take that on to take the word's power away.
So it's like nigga. It's like nigga.
It's the same kind of thing.
Wow.
And
so queer is like nigga.
So like transgender is an umbrella term that describes a lot of different things about people. I kind of use queer in that way because sometimes I find myself thinking like, gosh, I'm just really feeling men lately. And sometimes I'm like, I have no interest in men and I like women. And then and I'm also attracted to all kinds of androgynous, non-binary people, like in between. Like I just love cute people. And so, I've called myself bisexual, I've called myself pansexual,
and pansexual is
I'm attracted to anyone. So the difference is most people use bisexual to mean that like I'm attracted to my own gender and other genders as well. Mm-hmm. But gender is still a factor in being attracted. And most people describe pansexual as gender is completely meaningless to me and my attractions.
Okay.
And so gender does factor in for me. So I'm just
it does factor in.
So like so I just use queer because it's an umbrella. It's like
so how can gender factor in when you're romantically interested?
When I don't even know what gender is.
Yeah.
Like, that's a great question.
How does that work?
I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I literally had a conversation with my co-host about this on our last episode. It was because my co-host on the Gaytheist Manifesto is a person who identifies as non-binary.
Fucking great name.
Thank you. And so what is gender? What is it? What does it all mean? And it's
type in gender. I just want to see the definition, but go ahead.
most of the time, like the generic definitions, are just like the spectrum of male and female, which like, again, okay, cool. So what's male and what's female?
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard. So
how do you disassociate yourself with biology? Because there is biology. Procreation is a thing.
Well,
Okay, so
I haven't disassociated myself with biology. I would say, I never felt. I don't think biology and identity are inherently connected with one another.
They're not mutually exclusive.
I think the way that our society is constructed is because most of the time people fall into these categories, right? Most of the time people who are born with a penis are comfortable identifying with male. Most of the time people who are born with a vagina are comfortable identifying with female. So we assume that is the default for humanity, and anyone who falls outside is an aberration, and not in a good way, as opposed to it just being just another link on the spectrum of human experience.
So you've heard, and I mean, I'm pretty sure you've heard all arguments on this side. I know I'm saying on this side, I'm not on that side,
right?
But on the other side, and one of them is that transgenderism is a mental disorder. What is your response to that?
My first response is, even if it was, who cares?
Right.
It's not, because when you have that argument, a lot of times you get put into a trap of feeding into the idea that mental illness is a moral defect in the first place, right?
Yeah, I'm not gonna. Morality to me is so subjective. So
right.
We're all crazy.
We're all crazy. I agree.
And the way that medical science has defined this has changed. So if you look at the DSM, being transgender used to,
DSM.
the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Yeah, it's what they.
And it used to be in the DSM, if you were trans, this is a mental illness. And then they changed it to gender dysphoria being a condition that can be a symptom of mental illness, right? And gender dysphoria is the term that it's the discomfort because of the incongruity between your identity and your biology, right. Or the way that you feel like you should be versus the way that you are, right. Socially or biologically or physically or any of that kind of stuff. And they, if I remember correctly, they've even removed that as a thing, and they mention gender dysphoria as being a thing that can be treated. So it's not a mental illness, but it's a condition as opposed to an illness, I think is the way that they put it. And the thing that I would just say to that is, so first of all, again, even if it was a mental illness, okay, you know what I mean? Who cares? Like that doesn't make it any less real. But if you look at the evidence of people who are allowed to transition to whatever degree they feel they need to transition, because an important thing to point out is that being trans does not necessarily mean a physical or biological transformation. Not all trans people want surgery. Not all trans people want hormones. Not everyone's interested in radically changing their appearance or any of that kind of stuff. But for those who are, if you look at the increase in quality of life post transition. I mean, it's universal. I think the number of people who regret having transition related surgery is like 1% to 2%. You know what I mean? And most of the time when you hear stories like that, it's because the surgeon did something and screwed up. Or someone is uncomfortable with existing socially, and it's usually trans women, and a lot of times people find living as a woman in society to be so difficult that transition almost isn't worth it because of that discrimination. So again, them being trans is not the problem. It's the way they are treated because of who they are that is the problem. And all of these other things, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and all of that sort of stuff.
I would say the trans community is the highest rate of suicide in the country. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong. So the suicide rate for the general population is like 4 to 5%, depending on the study.
Okay.
If you look at people who are some flavor of queer, gay, bisexual, pansexual, all that, the number jumps to I think between like 8 and 10%.
Wow.
Sometimes as high as 15, I think. And this is people who attempt, I think, is the statistic. And with trans people, it's 44%.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's huge.
That's almost half the people that.
if you look at the reasons for this, and that's a statistic that a lot of people cite, saying like, well, being transgender is a bad thing because of that number. But if you dig into the number, the reason people do that is because it is so difficult to exist in society for some folks as a trans person, right? Thankfully, I'm not one of those people. Like, I have a great family, I have a job and a great community, so I am very blessed in that way, to use a religious term. But if you happen to be poor, if you happen to be not white, if you happen to have a disability, all of those things, because I'm not, I generally don't have to deal with people in society that I don't want to deal with. You know what I mean? I have the luxury of choosing the people that I associate with. So I'm not riding public transportation with people who may have a problem with who I am. Right. I'm not, standing in a welfare line. I'm not, trying to convince a landlord to rent an apartment to me, and they don't want to do that because of who I am. Like, those aren't situations that I'm put in, and a lot of our community does. Right. And I mean, there's a huge intersection with racism. If you look at the trans folks who are murdered every year, it's almost exclusively Black and Hispanic trans women.
Yeah, Black and Hispanic trans women, absolutely.
And so there's a huge
statistic.
Yeah, and so when you when you people cite the baseline statistic like that, and they're like, well, 44% of trans people have attempted suicide. Well, that means being trans is a bad thing. So if you accept who you are as a trans person, then that's the cognitive dissonance in your head that's making your life terrible, and that's not what it is. It's the way that society treats you because of that. I mean, I've seen people who have problems with anxiety and depression, and once they transition, those problems all but disappear. And that's
support groups are important.
It's huge.
The internet community is super important.
Yeah, social support is everything.
The internet is such a shitty place, though, because there's so many trolls, man.
My treatise on that is that I think the internet has amplified both the best and worst. So it's taken a lot out of the middle, if that makes sense.
I was saying this the other day. I had a comedy show. It was Hurricane Harvey came through Houston, and so I had a comedy benefit. It was for charity, and so I did like a 5-minute bit. And one of my bits was, people blame Obama and people blame Trump for the heightened political climate and the racism in the country, and I was like, I blame Facebook.
And you're not wrong.
It's the truth, because like you can no longer kind of hide behind your political ideologies. Like you're tied to them now, and you have to pick a side in today's world, and that is a scary thought. It's an interesting and like I keep saying, it's important. It was important for me to have this conversation, and so I think it was important for some people to hear this, and so I'm so happy that you came on. How far do you feel like it should? And that's a terrible way to phrase that. God, I'm trying to be as sensitive. There you go. We have religious talks all the time.
I'm not religious though.
I would disagree. We'll get into that. But so like say a woman transitions into a man, and a man transitions into a woman, and they have and they're a couple, and they have a kid. And how do you feel like they should influence their kid as far as gender is concerned? So, I mean, in a perfect world, I would say, like, why do we even have to think of things in that way? Right. And I want to be careful because I'm not a parent. Okay, so like I don't want to like have strong opinions on parenting because because I'm not a parent, so I don't want to like tell parents how to raise their kids or anything like that. Right. But you're a member of society that wants to see the best in us.
Yeah, and my thing is like, why don't we just let kids decide what they like? You know what I mean? If you're born with a penis, that doesn't necessarily mean you like trucks and G.I. Joes. Right. You know what I mean? If you're born with a vagina, that doesn't necessarily mean you like unicorns and princesses and pink things. Right. You know what I mean? So
and 100% honest here. My son, he's 4 years old now, and he super looks up to his big sister, and sometimes he plays with Barbies. Yeah. And for some reason that bothers me sometimes. Yeah. Like, why does that bother me? Why does that bother me?
It's what we grow up with, and I mean, I had kind of the same experiences, like I when I go over to my cousin's house, I'd like sneak playing with his sister's Barbies, right. Because I liked I like that. But like I also like Transformers and G.I. Joes because I'm a nerd. Like this is just who I am as a person, you know. And that's the thing that I always try to point out is that we all grow up with these really like rigid, outmoded, and frankly a lot of times wrong ideas about the way that people are supposed to be based on things like the body parts they're born with, or and name it, any characteristic that shouldn't necessarily mean something about a person, but we've decided that it does. Right. And of course it's hard with kids because like for the first few years of your kid's life, your kid can't tell you what they want. You just have to I just have to I just have to go buy toys. You know what I mean?
And that's the tough thing is you're trying to teach this kid how to I don't know, and that's the problem is nobody fucking knows, and we're all just out here guessing, right? And so we grow up into the society, and to be a productive member of society, you have to do this, you have to get a nice job, you got to get a good education, yada yada yada, and we don't even know if that's the best thing to do. You know, it's just what we're assigned to do, and so when I see my kid playing with, and I'm not saying I'm like drop those Barbie dolls, I let him do his thing,
right?
Do what you want to do. But a part of me wants him to go play with the ball. Part of me wants him to play with more masculine things. And that could be my own gender bias. And this is why I keep saying this is an important conversation for me to have.
I think the biggest thing would be to just let go of that culture of expectation.
It's hard,
you know. Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But
to let go of any expectation.
You're right.
Period. Yeah, you're right.
But because I imagine like if I'm a parent and I'm going to buy my kid toys, like I'm going to buy what I think my kid will enjoy. But of course, what I think my kid is going to enjoy is going to be informed by who I am,
of course,
and what I like. You know what I mean? I think the important thing is that if that turns out to be wrong, that it's like, oh, okay, you want to do this instead of what I thought, then cool. Like there's, there are parents who like consciously raise their kids genderless, whatever that means.
And see, and that's part of like, what does that mean?
Well, right, and my thing is like, I don't even know that we necessarily have to go that far because again, almost everyone is cisgender, right? Cisgender is the word for not transgender.
So I'm a cis.
Yeah,
black man.
Cisgender. Yeah. I think it could be as easy as well, we use he for you because most people who are like you are comfortable with that. If you're not, it's cool. Just let me know. And like I really think it could be as easy as that. Right. You know what I mean? It just.
What pronoun are you comfortable with?
I use she, her.
You use she and her. Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard they before, and like so like they are like that is socially acceptable as well.
Yeah. Well, if that's what someone uses,
right.
like my co-host, like I said, is a non-binary person. They use they pronouns.
They.
Yeah. They them and their.
So when you categorize yourself as non-binary, you're saying I'm not male or female.
Right.
That is so foreign. That's fucking wild to me.
Yeah. Well, it was to me too, because again, I'm a trans person, so I know what it's like to step outside of gender boundaries in a certain way.
So in a perfect world, there's no discrimination, and I'll say that your way of life is the only way of life. Non-binary people just are what they are. How do you categorize gender? In a perfect world, how do you label this?
To be honest, I would be fine leaving it as someone's own description of their subjective experience and just leaving it at that.
Huh.
Whatever makes sense to you.
Okay, so we had this on a podcast a while ago. I don't know if you've seen this. It's this guy, and I don't want to minimize your experience, but this is just an analogy.
Yeah.
So we had this. There's a guy that identifies as a feline. He's a cat. Like you've seen him before?
I don't know if I've seen the specific one, but I know. I mean, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so
they call them as otherkin usually.
Yeah. So in that specific instance, do you recognize him as a cat? So this guy, we brought this up on my last podcast, two podcasts ago. But so this man, he feels like he's a cat. He got surgically implanted whiskers. He got tattoos. He feels like he's a feline. So do you recognize him as a cat?
Well, I mean, what because I would have to know what that means to him, right? Is he saying he's like literally not human?
Yeah, he doesn't feel like he's human.
You know, I have certain feelings about that actually, and
They're important.
we did an episode of the show on otherkin.
Okay.
So
he would be called otherkin.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the word most people use to describe that kind of thing.
Okay.
My big thing is like, why do I care?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like at the absolute worst, people who identify themselves as otherkin like are just being like kind of harmlessly weird.
Right.
Why do I care?
You wouldn't identify him as a cat though.
I don't know. I'd have to have a conversation with that person to understand
Right.
it because I don't pretend to understand the intricacies of the issue like super well.
Right. So just I mean I'm simply devil's advocate here, right? Yeah. So, and I'm not saying people look at transgender people like people look at themselves as the cat man. That's not what I'm saying.
Actually, a lot of society does. A lot of society will say they feel it's the same thing. Yeah.
So I mean I don't. But I can see how people do. I can see how people can say, where does it stop as far as like identity? Where do you draw the line of where I respect somebody's identification of themselves?
Well, so the question is what does it mean to accept someone's identification of themselves? Right. You know, I mean, what are they asking for? You know what I mean?
And that's the thing. So like if you're talking about like legislation, right? So like should he have a cat bathroom? And I know I'm getting a little ridiculous with the analogy here, but that's how they view it. They view it like that far off. You know what I'm saying? And I don't. And like I said, this conversation was super. It was awakening to me because I didn't know a lot of these things. But just for listeners out there who are still on the fringe or still on the right, people view transgender people as this. I have no idea that you can identify as whatever you want to identify, but like rules are rules, laws are laws, men is men, and women are women. So how do you cross that line? Like is there a line in your opinion as far as okay, we got to stop it somewhere? And that might be a disrespectful question.
I would say it's a qualified no. The question that I would ask back is, if the answer is that I really don't think there is a line, what have we lost? Because you know, is this guy like saying that all public restrooms should have a litter box for people who identify as cats? You know what I mean? Like, if we're talking about something like that, I'm saying probably not going to back that. You know what I mean? But if we're just talking about like how we interact with people socially, like, why do I care? You know what I mean? What have I lost if I say, okay, yeah, I recognize you as a cat? What have I lost? What have we lost as a society if we do that? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, like, they'll say morality.
Well, right.
And
exactly.
To our opening, that shit is stupid anyway.
Right. Yeah. So I just, you know, I have such a hard time caring about you know, otherkin, people who identify themselves as animals and all that kind of stuff. Like I just, you know what I mean?
It's not that serious.
It's not. You know, it's not my experience. I don't claim to understand it. And I was kind of skeptical of it before I did an episode of my show about it with a couple of people who identify that way. But like I said, I mean, at the absolute worst, you're talking about people who are being kind of weird but not really hurting anybody. So like, why do I care?
My general rule is as long as you're not harming other people, you can do whatever the fuck you want to do, man. Yeah. It doesn't bother me one bit.
You know, and the other thing that I would say too is it's a bad form of argument when you say, okay, I'm trans, I would like you to use she, her pronouns for me, and I'm going to use the women's restroom. You know, we automatically jump to like, well, what's next? You're going to tell me you're a cat? Right. No, that's not what I'm doing at all. You know what I mean? And it was
a ridiculous analogy, but just to frame it in the context.
Well, no, you're right. Because I mean, those are the conversations that happen, right? Those things do happen, and I've had that thrown at me.
Right.
And I'm like, you can bring up the most ridiculous example if you want to. Like, I mean, you know, you can bring up like, well, I know an atheist who killed a guy once. Are you that because you're an atheist? You know what I mean? Like, it's the same kind of like we're bringing up the outliers to invalidate what most people are asking for, which is simply like hey, I just kind of want to exist in society and be treated like a human being. Like that's really, it's not a huge ask. We're not really asking for a ton,
Right.
So
what is the biggest social hurdle you feel like in the transgender community right now?
Healthcare is the biggest one.
Talk to me.
So I talked a little bit about the gatekeeping around, and it's not just around surgeries either. Hormones, it's hard to get for a lot of folks, especially people who don't have insurance or people who are low income.
Right. I'm super ill informed about healthcare, and part of it is because of the privilege that I played in the NFL.
Right.
And so we were on Cigna, and it's like the best healthcare in the country. And I never have looked into healthcare. I have no idea what the debate is about. I hear Trump talking about it, or Obamacare. I hear people going back and forth, and I just haven't looked into it.
And a lot of the problems around healthcare with trans people have absolutely nothing to do with trans stuff. I mean, it's access to basic healthcare.
Okay.
I have a friend who went to see a doctor for a sinus infection, and the doctor started quizzing him about his genitals.
What the fuck?
Yeah. And, I have a friend who was having some chest pains and went to the ER, and they turned her away because the way that she looked didn't match the picture on her ID. Because she was trans, she didn't have the money for a new ID.
Yeah.
But she was having chest pains, and they thought she was a drug seeker using a fake ID, and they turned her away.
Wow.
When she thought, thankfully, nothing bad happened. It didn't turn out to be anything serious, I guess, because she's still around. Right. But yeah, they wouldn't treat her.
Could have been.
Yeah. And just lots of different things like that. And then, when you talk about more trans-specific healthcare, so there's an organization called WPATH. It's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Mm-hmm. And they have standards set up for transition care. And none of these are laws or rules. They're just guidelines that a lot of doctors follow. And their guidelines are, if you want to get hormone treatment, you have to be presenting as your intended gender for at least 3 months. And you have to have been seeing a therapist. And then your therapist will write you a letter to an endocrinologist who will prescribe you the hormones. So that's 2 doctors and 3 months of presenting outwardly without the benefit of hormones, putting yourself in danger a lot of times to access hormones on a basic level, right? Because hormones aren't magical, but they do change your outward appearance and they help you blend in. And so they're asking you to go out yourself, and then a lot of times put yourself in danger to even access that. Right. Now, thankfully, that's changing. There are a lot of doctors who don't follow those guidelines, and they do informed consent, which is how we do healthcare for literally fucking everything else in the world. Right. You go to a doctor and you say, I want this, and the doctor says, here's some paperwork that tells you what this is going to do to your body, what the risks are, and you sign this piece of paper, and I give you a prescription. Yeah. And for surgeries, I had to have a letter from my endocrinologist saying that I'd been on hormones for a year. I had to have a letter from a therapist saying that I'd been seeing her for a year. I had to have an evaluation from another therapist saying that I was mentally fit. And
so as far as that aspect of it is concerned, right? So if someone's gay, right? So the argument of it is it's natural. There's gay animals, there's gay this, there's gay that. It's hard to test for a trans animal, like an animal who feels a certain way. So
there are animals who defy traditional gender roles too. You're going to ask me for examples, and I'm not going to be able to give them to you because but yeah, that does exist. I think it'd probably be a little far to describe them as transgender animals, but that kind of stuff. If you look at typically male behavior and typically female in the animal kingdom, you will find crisscross there as well.
Right. Is it because hormones actually change the physiology of who you are? And so to take hormones to feel more comfortable and please, like I said, it's not that it's purely.
You're good.
You're good. Because I don't want to come off as insensitive because that's not what it is. It's curiosity. But to take hormones to feel more comfortable with who you are, what does that feel like? To actually manipulate your body into comfortability.
It's the difference between watching a black and white console TV and a high def 4K TV. Okay. It's like seeing the world that way versus seeing the world in high def is the way that I explain.
So you'll take hormones and you'll say, "Oh, this feels amazing."
I'll give you a great example. So for most of my life, my emotional reactions to things and my relationships with people felt kind of stunted. I would think like, gosh, I feel like I should be feeling more strongly about this than I do.
Right.
I should be more sad. I should be more angry. I should be happier, that kind of thing. And
We all should be more happy.
right. And when I started taking hormones, all of that stuff just became congruent. You know, the feelings that I were feeling, whether they were good or bad, they felt like the right ones. Like I was experiencing things on the level that I felt like I should. And I'll give you an example of this. So was having a really terrible week because when I came out to my social circles and everyone before I came out at work. And so I was basically like, from the outside, I was two different people for about a year. And that extremely emotionally taxing. It was the worst year of my life.
Balancing that, I bet.
And so I was really feeling the weight of that. And I saw this stupid thing on Facebook it was the last Calvin and Hobbes comic. And it was like a fan thing that somebody had drawn. And it was like Calvin is on his deathbed and he sees Hobbes one more time. And it's like super emotional. And I'm a really sensitive person, so it would have made me cry anyways. But I had all of this weight on me from other things. And I lost my shit completely. And I was like ugly crying for like a half hour. And it was one of the most intense emotional experiences I've ever had. And after it was over with, and I was kind of thinking a little more rationally at that point, I was like, gosh, as bad as that was, it felt like the right way to react. Crying is cathartic and you can feel better after you cry because it helps you get weight off.
Right.
But there was also the feeling of I finally feel like I'm reacting to things in a way that makes sense to me. And I was able to relate to others emotionally on a level that made more sense to me. I was able to be more cerebral and dig in with people more and get to know them more as people, and just like feel feelings, you know.
Right. So what is your fiance? What gender would
she's a trans woman too.
She's a trans woman. So she was
assigned male at birth and then transitioned just like me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We actually had our surgeries together.
Oh, really?
Well, hers was a week before mine.
That's...
Yeah, and our moms came out to. We had it in San Francisco, and our moms came out and took care of us for.
It's fucking romantic.
Exactly, it's the cutest thing in the world. Of course, until like we get home and our moms aren't there to take care of us anymore, and we're like still like, well, I mean, we're still recovering, we're still in pain, we're still like, it's obviously it's a big deal emotionally, even though it's a good thing, it's still very draining.
Right.
And so like, you know, I'm having a bad day, I need her, she's having a bad day, she needs me, and we can't be there for each other. And it's like, hey babe, this is a great idea. Why don't we do like emotional, hugely life-changing stuff together more often? Because like this is working out really well.
Right. Man. So you're a transgender woman. Mm-hmm. You're an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Why get married?
That's a great question. There's a couple of things with that. I will freely admit that it probably has a lot to do with societal programming. I want to get married. I don't.
It's the woman in you.
Right. Speaking of gender stereotypes, right? Honestly, to me, I think it has a lot to do with the wedding itself because
it's definitely the woman in you.
But
you want to feel like a princess.
It's not even that, honestly. What it is, so many of the important people in my life are people that I don't get to see very often. And because it's from doing atheist activism and that kind of stuff. There are people I see at cons maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And these are people who, I mean, they are family to me. The guy that we asked to officiate is someone like, I see him as like dad, uncle, and brother all rolled into one. Like he's one of my favorite people in the world. And the idea of having all of those people in the room together to celebrate love and to celebrate her and I's relationship is something that's appealing to me.
I say that all the time as people, like we need more reasons to celebrate. And I have a girlfriend now, she's pregnant. More what?
More reasons.
More reasons to celebrate.
Yeah.
We can never have enough.
reasons.
I'm thinking about it. Like our society, like we celebrate shitty holidays. Like Christmas is a shitty holiday. Thanksgiving is a terrible fucking holiday.
Right.
Columbus Day is fucking awful.
Those reasons.
Right.
But I got a lot of more reasons to celebrate every day.
Yeah, but we need more reasons.
You can never have enough.
That's what I'm saying. It's like we need more reasons to celebrate. And so
just think of something every day and celebrate.
I mean, not everybody's a millionaire like you, man. Not everybody has that luxury, man.
You don't need money to celebrate. I'll dance and shout anytime.
That's true. He's one of the most
I dance,
optimistic
I sing,
humans ever.
I laugh every day.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I try to because I
cuss
think it's
people out
important.
every day.
I mean, sometimes you need that. You know what I mean?
Feels good.
But honestly, it comes down to like I'm in awe of the fact that we found each other. You know,
That's awesome.
actually, we found each other through my podcast.
So where's she from?
She grew up in Cincinnati, just like me.
Okay, wow.
And I happened to post in this private Facebook group that we were both a part of. I posted a thing about my podcast, and she started listening, and she started giving me money on Patreon, and I do like a monthly like Google Hangout discussion group with people who give over $4 an episode for the show.
Okay.
And so we started to get to know each other through that, and she added me on Facebook, and I was actually thinking about asking her out, and she ended up asking me out instead.
Sparks
And-
flew.
Oh yeah, it was great, and we're just we're really healthy for each other, and she's super supportive of everything that I do. I never get the guilt trip for when I fly to Houston to do podcast
Man, we
interviews.
appreciate. What's her name?
Celeste.
Celeste. Man, we appreciate you, Celeste.
Yes.
We appreciate it. It was,
Love you.
Shout
Mwah.
out to Celeste, man. So we've talked about the woes of the life that you live. What gives you the most optimism about our society and the activism that you face today?
Honestly, it's seeing people thrive and being reminded constantly that that's possible. One of the messages that I always try to get across is, when I give a talk, people who listen to the podcast, any of that kind of stuff, they're like, "Gosh, you're so courageous. I respect you for what you're doing so much." And the thing that I always try to remind people is like, I am a shining example of what happens when things go right. Like when you come out and your family is cool and your community is cool, and you meet people who love and support you and affirm you for who you are. So like I have all of that baggage out of the way, or most of that baggage out of the way, and I can just do the things that I'm passionate about in life. And I can I can fly out to do podcast interviews. I can go give talks at conferences, and I have time to do a podcast, and I can sort of open up the intimate details of my life in that way. And all of that's possible because the people in my life made it possible. And so I like to, I'm an example of what can be done. Like, imagine if people didn't have to deal with this baggage, and thankfully I see that happening with people and what people can achieve, even just in terms of just being happy. I don't even necessarily mean in terms of seeing someone's value as, what they contribute to society, but their value just in being a happy person. The joy that comes with being able to live your life as who you are. It's something that I get to see in people. And that's just knowing that, like, among all of the shittiness that happens in the world, that's still possible. I hate how difficult it is for some people. And that's why I do, the activism that I do. Right. But it's amazing to be reminded that that's possible. And
I want to go hug a bear right now.
Right. And I just, and I see it all the time. And I have the enormous privilege of sometimes being able to facilitate that. People send emails and messages to the podcast all the time. They're trying to figure themselves out. And they're sort of, working out their journey, going back through my podcast catalog, like working through their journey as I'm working through mine.
Wow.
And it's absolutely incredible. And I'm reminded all of the time that, like, it's important to not forget about the bad stuff because we want to be realistic about where things are. Right. But I mean, as human beings, we need positive affirmation. You know what I mean? We need to know that good things can still happen and that beauty is possible. And I thankfully what I do is I'm often reminded of that. And if I have to say, that's the thing that I hold on to, like when things are the worst, or I'm having a bout of depression or any of that kind of stuff, that's the thing that I hold on to. Is I look back on all of the experiences that I've had and seeing people, go from struggling to thriving, seeing myself going from struggling to thriving, and knowing that, that's possible. That's a thing that we can do. And that's a needle that's actually possible to move. Right. It is a fight that is winnable. Yeah. Even if it's not ultimately winnable, we can make a lot of progress, and we can lift a lot of people up along the way.
Wow.
So that's my hope. That's what I hold on to.
I don't think I could have paid a better guest to come and talk about this issue. Like, I'm dead serious, because I put it out on Twitter, of all places to do it.
Right.
I was like, I need to talk about this, and I want to talk about it openly. And people recommended you, and then you hit me, and I was like, I don't know where the fuck this conversation is gonna go, but it was so enlightening for
That's awesome.
myself.
I am glad.
I consider myself middle left, and some of my right issues were about this,
Yeah.
and they're not anymore.
Man.
100%.
Made me
Because
cry.
no, don't do that. Because hearing somebody's experience and you're so eloquent and you're so detailed and everything is so thought out and researched, and it's so relatable. Because I mean, I've had struggles in this society, as you know, growing up in first world poverty. And being a mixed kid who's black and Mexican, and just trying to find my way in society and trying to fit in, trying to find my way, until I realized, fuck these people, I'm gonna do me. And your fuck these people, I'm gonna do me was really that. Like, I'm gonna do me, and it's inspiring. It's
Well, thank
inspiring, and I appreciate you sharing your story and being so open, because I was. It could have been misconstrued as disrespectful, but I was purely curious, and you were so kind to give us your time. Do you have any questions? Because it's not every day that somebody so open is here.
Hit me with what you got.
I mean, I was more thinking about the like, so if you're atheist, you're not spiritual at all, huh? Like, at all. So I was just wondering, like, what if somebody was born with a body but they didn't identify as human?
I don't know.
I'm much more than a human.
So we talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
And because it's interesting. Fuck, I'm glad you brought that up.
See what I'm saying?
Okay, so he's always going on about this mind and brain shit, right? So he thinks that we are more than the brain, and he's talking about essentially a soul.
Don't even say more. Say both then.
Okay, so but you're essentially talking about a soul.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the word we got for it.
He strongly identifies with a soul. Like, he feels like a soul. And I feel like that is bullshit. That's just my opinion. I don't like, it's unconfirmable. I can say I'm whatever, and I can't verify that, right? So he feels like that. So as an atheist, there's definitely a spectrum. It's crazy we have to call ourselves atheists in the first place.
That's what I'm saying. Why you gotta call yourself anything?
I mean, okay, and we talked about this before we started recording. Was
because the expectation is that you are someone who believes in a God of some kind.
I ain't living for nobody's expectation.
No, I think it's important. This is why I think it's important to identify. If you don't believe that there is a higher power, if you have a lack of belief, I think it's important for you to call yourself an atheist, because it gives shock value, number one. And number two,
who are you trying to shot?
Hear me out. It helps people who are on the fence, who are cornered into believing things that they don't necessarily believe. So, like you, for instance, you grew up, and I hope your parents don't watch this episode, but you grew up Christian, and you, along the way, you kind of were like, this is not really what I dig, until you found your way. And your way is your way.
I had to make Jesus 2 + 2 is 4 to me.
Yes.
He had to be real to me.
He had to make sense to you, right? So it had to make sense. So there are people out there who religiosity doesn't make any sense to them. And so if they see me, if they see her, if they see somebody that they can identify with mentally and say, you know what, fuck, I agree. And it's okay to tell people around me. It's okay to express this. And so they don't feel pressured into living this life of entrapment, because that's what it ends up being. I mean, you talked about it, how people will.
Who's trapped?
People, there are millions of people out there, I believe, that are.
You're talking about religious people?
No, that are not religious, that are in religious families, and they can't express the way they feel, or they'll be ousted. And so that's why I feel like it's important for myself, as a quote unquote public figure, to identify as an atheist.
Wait,
but that's
going
against religion, though. But the good Christians that I know, they don't look at Christianity as a religion. They look at it as a relationship.
I mean,
what?
So do Muslims, and so do it gets along. If you are chilling and you don't bother nobody with your shit, by all means. But when you start telling people how to live their life, that's when I'm not saying you do. You're
but who's that?
you're a little Buddha, man. I love you, bro. Man.
Yeah, my thing is, like, everybody spends a lot of their lives just trying to figure out who they are and what things mean to them, you know. So I could say, like, you know, if you say, like, you feel like you have a soul, like, you're attributing that word to a piece of your consciousness that comes from a part of your brain. And if you think it's more than that, why do I care?
Right.
You know what I mean? I would say I don't agree. I don't feel that
So
way
you don't
about
believe in the
myself.
soul?
But no.
Okay.
No.
You want to tell me why? Want me to tell you why I care? Because the soul and the brain and everything, it allows me, you know, when people be like, "You feel me?" It actually allows me to feel something that you're going through. I couldn't
I do that too.
without my brain and everything. So, and I think we're all related, and we are able to do that because we're all connected to one thing, and that one thing is really who I am. That one thing that we're connected to. And this body just helps me
facilitate the message.
Exactly.
I'm with you.
And
I wish everybody thought like you.
and I would say like I don't understand why someone would have a problem with that. Like I mean I don't feel that way. Like I don't really think that's necessarily how I believe
because
the
some
world
people
is.
don't want
But,
to
like,
feel part of one thing. They're like, no, you're that.
Well, see,
I'm
and
this.
here's the important thing is that I experience the same things you experience. I just attribute it to a different mechanism.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? Because
I heard it the whole time.
Yeah,
I was listening.
because that's the most of the reason I do what I do is because of that human connection, right? Like a lot of times people ask me, you know, what do I enjoy about what I do? And it's the human connection, right? It's
So what would you label that human connection?
I mean, I would just call it just that, just community.
Because that's just I think that's so beautiful about what he said. He would call that God.
Okay.
Like, don't let me misrepresent your position, but like
it's a way to describe it.
Yeah, like her human connection is your God.
It's a way that God communicates with human, but he can communicate anyway. And I'm calling it a he just because that's how I'm used to talking.
Yeah.
But please ignore
Yeah.
the he.
Yeah. To me, that's just community. To me, the way that I see it, and you know, shared experience, and you know, love and affirmation. And
I needed this conversation, man.
Yeah.
I needed this conversation.
Yeah.
Man.
In a lot of ways, I think.
100%,
Right.
100%. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I've made so many amazing connections with people that way, and that's, you know, that's what I get out of it. That's what I love and enjoy, is just like making connections with people, and like, you know, making new friends, and you know, having a chance to like make somebody feel good about themselves, or you know, having a chance to help somebody love themselves or see themselves as being worthy of being happy or being loved by other people, because a lot of people grow up without that kind of affirmation.
100%.
You know, and so my thing is like, if we can agree that that's what's important, what you call it, why does it matter to me?
Right.
Like I don't. If you call it God,
yeah,
if you call it God, if you call it spirituality, okay, you know what I mean? Like let's move on and talk about loving people.
Everything
you know what I
is
mean?
everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, damn it, Callie, this has been an amazing conversation.
I agree. I had a lot of fun. I am really glad this happened.
I'm so happy that you obliged. This was amazing. It has opened my eyes to a totally different worldview, expanded my brain, and I'm going to do more research, and I'm going to be extremely more empathetic to people. This was amazing. It was really, it changed. You ever have those conversations that change your opinion?
Oh yeah,
This changed my opinion.
that's huge.
You're a
amazing.
great representative. The fact that we have to have representatives is
Right.
but
Always got to represent.
Well, right, and I always, you know, a caveat that I always say is I'm obviously one trans person among millions,
100%.
you know, so it's like I always say, like, you know, if you really want to know, like, you got to listen to and talk to a lot of different people, because there are a lot of different experiences, you know.
Right.
You know, thankfully I'm just a person who, like, I mean, I have the ability to do things like this, so I try to.
You're well versed, and like I said, you know, hopefully I was a good representative of Black people.
Yes. I've got a Black friend to add to my collection. I'm super excited.
Yeah, we come in packs, man. As Mel Gibson would say.
Right.
And we multiply.
No, but if there's anything you want to plug, you have a podcast, the Gaytheist Manifesto, probably the best name in the world right now.
Yeah, so the Gaytheist Manifesto is my main thing. It's
Where can I find you on Twitter? Is it Instagram, Facebook?
I'm at Gaytheist Callie on Twitter. The Gaytheists on Twitter for the show. And then my podcast is the Gaytheist Manifesto. It's very activism, education, community oriented. And then I have a storytelling podcast called The Queer Side, which is not activism oriented. It's just find somebody with an amazing story to tell and let them tell it. And it's all from queer or trans people. So stuff that may or may not have something to do with them being queer or trans, but the idea is to just sort of like open a window into queer and trans life, whatever that means, whether that has anything to do with your gender or your sexuality or not.
Man, I'm definitely a fan now, and I hope people like yourself continue to speak out, because it's important to have that conversation. It's important for us to form our view of other human beings like human beings, and I think it's important, man. You do an amazing job. You're very well. I've said it all already. Enough. Enough of you already.
And I appreciate you having me. I was excited because I watched the first couple of episodes of your show.
Oh,
on YouTube.
thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
And I was like, this is going to be a good interview.
It was fun, man.
I listened to the interview with your mom, and then the interview with Humble, and I was just like, man, this is going to be awesome. I'm really excited.
I'm glad I met you.
Lived up to expectations for sure.
I'm glad I met those, man. For sure. So we end every podcast the same. I'm sure you saw.
I did.
All right. We are trying to get Jim Carrey on this motherfucker. So if you could please plead to him, look into this camera and try to get Jim Carrey on the Now What podcast.
Jim. Friend. Buddy. Pal. You have no idea who I am. Probably will never have any idea who I am. Unless he's on the podcast, because you can...
Boom.
Boom.
We're going to put a compilation together.
We got to have like a big reunion at the end.
But
that would be dope. That would be dope.
By now, I feel like there's enough material from the Now What podcast out there to determine that it is a podcast worthy of your time. So it's good stuff. So I think it would be a fantastic move for you to come on the show.
Thank you very much. For us. For everybody.
Yes.
For society. So, now we appreciate your time. Once again, this has been amazing. And you got a friend in me, man. You have a friend in me.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
My man.
Right. It seems like we're going to play the song and like hold hands and sway.
Oh, man. Yeah. But so enjoy the rest of your time in Houston. If you can, hook me up with Matt Dillahunty. That's my guy.
Absolutely.
That is my
I will make
guy.
that connection.
That's my guy. Send my love over there. And I hope you safe travels back. This was amazing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you.